Hello and welcome back. Uh, so, I'm going to try a new format of video today. Something that I've realized over the years, I'm getting reminded of, is I am heavily a visual learner. So, I put together a really concise visual. It took me no time at all. So, low key, no effort. But I wanted to do this in hopes that the walkthrough of this series that we're going to start, I'm going to start a few different ones probably, because I feel like creating categories for these videos is important. And then I realized a lot of the stuff I'm putting out assumes so much knowledge on the viewer. So I wanted to do basically a crash course in the different forms of apologetics. So what we're going to do here is go through the main tenets of apologetics. This is not all encompassing, and I'll make a statement at the end that kind of reflects that. But what you need to know is these are the core formulas that people would be ascribed to, and different people ascribe to different ones, right? So, for example, there are people like myself, and to put myself in the same exact category as C.S. Lewis, we use different forms given to different people. So what I never knew in college, and what I was, it took a while for me to kind of ingrain in myself, is you can use every form of apologetics at different times to different people and different demographics, right? I quickly ran into the presuppositionalist because that's majorly what Reformed apologetics is centered around. And I wanted to understand, why do they only use that? Why are they so against evidentialism? And there was this clash between William Lane Craig and Cornelius Van Til and these other guys. So while I use different forms, you'll learn why using different forms for different people is important. And hopefully there's something in this video for everybody. So let's begin. Learn the forms of apologetics. So the very first one is the one I just mentioned, the presuppositional apologetics, right? This method assumes that Christianity is the necessary foundation for all rational thought, and that all other worldviews apart from it are internally inconsistent. Now, the presuppositional or epistemological arguments are some of my favorite now. I used to be very attached to them because I didn't fully grasp the power of them. But when you can set together a criteria for knowledge and why you know what you know, this can be very powerful. So the strengths of it are, it's best for engaging atheists, skeptics, and those who claim to reject all religious authorities. It demonstrates the internal contradictions of their worldviews, right? So this internal coherence is one of the criteria that you have for epistemology, why you know what you know and why you believe what's true. And the presuppositional arguments are very, very solid in showing this. It shows that only Christianity provides a foundational logic for morality and in human experience. So again, best used against atheists and materialists, sometimes relativists who reject objective truth, because it brings them into a grounding for what they do believe and what they don't believe, and skeptics. Early church fathers and some Catholic thinkers who use this approach. St. Augustine, in his Confessions, he argues that reason itself points to the necessity of divine truth. St. Irenaeus used this approach against Gnostics, showing that their systems collapse without the God of the Scripture. So Irenaeus does exactly what I just said, where he utilizes it within a niche. So it's not just the atheist worldview, it's any worldview. And so I actually created a presuppositional verification system with criteria, and I won't name the person that I based it off. I actually used people's quotes from various videos. I'm not going to name them yet, but I used that to formulate this very argument, and I can use it to show that Catholicism is actually the most reasonable and coherent internal belief system as opposed to Orthodoxy or Protestant theology. So the best practitioners of presuppositional, though, is, as I mentioned, is Cornelius Van Til, Greg Bahnsen, and then some of the early church fathers that I also mentioned. So an example argument of this is you demand evidence for God, but you rely on logic and morality to even ask the question, where does logic come from in materialist universe? If you deny an intelligent creator, you undermine your own ability to reason. John Lennox, of all people, who is a very heavy evidentialist, uses this very argument. He says you can't even argue and trust what is in your brain if you don't believe that an intelligent mind is behind it, because if nothing intelligent created your mind, then your mind cannot be trusted. It's a very, very powerful argument, in my opinion. Number 2, classical apologetics. Uses reason and philosophy to argue for the existence of God first, then moves into the more niche things like Christianity and Catholicism. The strengths of this, it's excellent for philosophical discussions and non-believers open to reason. It provides logical proofs for God, like Aquinas' 5 ways. It helps those who struggle with atheism or agnosticism, and leads naturally into historical and evidential arguments once God's existence is established. Some of the early church fathers that did this, obviously St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine also used it. Again, a lot of these saints used different forms of apologetics at different times for different reasons. Augustine used it against Neoplatonism to demonstrate that God is the source of all being. Boethus, why do I never say that right? The consolation of philosophy argues for divine providence through reason. St. Anselm, I'm pretty meh on him, formulated the ontological argument, though, which is fantastic. So some of the practitioners, St. Thomas Aquinas, William Lane Craig, and the late Norm Geisler. An example argument of this would be, and I missed the slide, I'm sorry, would be everything that begins to exist that has cause. The universe began to exist, therefore therefore the universe has a cause. That cause must be outside of time, space, and matter, God. Right? So you get into various forms of the ontological argument, the teleological arguments, and the transcendent being argument, which I think are all fantastic. Personally, I think a melded version of the transcendent argument along with the teleological argument are so powerful, it's unbelievable. We're not going to talk about the teleological argument today. We'll talk about that another time. Number 3, evidential apologetics. This builds a cumulative case using historical, archaeological, and scientific evidence to prove Christianity, but it is not to be mistaken with the cumulative apologetic form, which we will talk about in just a minute. This is best for historical reliability of Scripture, the resurrection, miracles, and fulfilled prophecy. It appeals to people who demand empirical proof and works well with skeptics. So some of the early church fathers that use this, St. Justin Martyr used historical evidence of prophecy fulfillment to argue for Christ. Christ did this himself on the road to Emmaus. Eusebius of Caesarea collected historical records proving Christianity's earlier origins. St. Irenaeus defended apostolic succession as evidence for the true faith. G.K. Chesterton used history to argue for Catholicism's continuity. And some of the best practitioners of this, especially when it comes to resurrection, is Gary Habermas, Lee Strobel, and I'm going to throw in J. Warner Wallace, even though he's more of a regurgitator than an actual argument creator. But he's very articulate, so I appreciate him. So an example argument of this, which is already on the screen, the resurrection is the best explanation of the historical evidence that we have pertaining to the event. We have early testimony, multiple independent sources, and hostile witnesses confirming it happened. Again, an internal criteria that proves the point. And number 4, the cumulative case apologetics. An example of this would be God's existence is supported by reason, historical evidence, morality, and personal experience. No single argument proves Christianity alone, but together they form an overwhelming case that Christianity is true. It doesn't rely on a single method, but builds a case using multiple approaches, but not all the approaches necessarily. It's usually the ones I just listed. This is a well-rounded one. So if you have someone who is jumping around in arguments, you can use the cumulative case apologetics that C.S. Lewis really formulated really well. He blended logic, morality, and history into his works like Mere Christianity. Timothy Keller did this as well, and I believe Timothy Keller is darn near a replica of C.S. Lewis in many ways. St. Augustine, again, combined philosophy and history and moral arguments to defend Christianity at multiple points throughout his writings. And then one that we didn't talk about here was moral apologetics. And moral apologetics argues that objective morality requires God, right? I don't love the moral one because there's so many different nuances in it. I've used it many times, but it never leads anywhere. Though I do think it's valid. St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, Pope St. John Paul II all used it. Arguing that morality is based on the internal law of God. The natural law is of God. So an example argument of that would be, if morality is just a human invention, then no one can say the Holocaust is truly wrong. But if morals truly exist, they must be grounded in something beyond humans that have a perfect extreme, which are God. So, guys, I hope that was helpful for you. Kind of a crash course, quick kind of breakdown of everything. So the thing that I wanted to mention was, outside of the cumulative case, you have to understand who you're addressing. And sometimes you're going to be addressing somebody that requires evidence, right? So you're going to be heavily relying on evidential apologetics. And for me, I always go to like the teleological arguments of the fine-tuning of the universe and things like that. But then you might have somebody within your family who is questioning the resurrection, right? And so you have to get into the history. But really, and I can't believe I'm actually saying this, but I think the strongest case can be shown by a criteria of knowledge. That is the presupposition verification. So everyone has presuppositions and bias, but your presuppositions aren't always correct. So why do you know what you believe is true? How can you verify what is true, right? And this leads into something very extreme, which is like, if you can't do that, then everything is relative, everything is subjective, and nothing actually matters. And in that case, we go to the moral argument, and murdering doesn't matter, the Holocaust doesn't matter, and all these different things just don't matter. So apologetics, when used correctly and fruitfully, can be a great tool to not only evangelize, but defend your faith, which Paul tells us in Scripture to give a reason and be ready to give a reason, right? So I hope you found this helpful. If you did, comment below. Let me know. If you have questions specifically on a topic, let me know. I don't know the direction that I'm going to take this. I might go super far into some theological stuff, maybe the epistemological verification stuff. I don't know. So we'll see. And I appreciate you guys standing